So, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. My name is Mike Carlin. I'm your host, and today I am very excited to introduce you to Beth Anstandig. Now, Beth is a lifelong cowgirl. She's a licensed psychotherapist and professor. She has 25 years of experience developing, implementing, and training people in natural leadership, a model that she pioneered. She's trained thousands of leaders and teams from some of the most renowned corporations, universities, and nonprofits, helping them awaken their innate power and awareness to live, lead, and work with more authentic relationships and connection. And that sounds good to me. Her book, The Human Nerd, Awakening Our Natural Leadership, will be available on April 12th. And here to talk about that book and so much more is Beth Anstandig. Beth, welcome to Uncorking a Story.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Oh.
You called my book The Human Nerd instead of The Human Herd.
Oh, it's The Human Herd. Oh, look at that. I have to fire somebody over this. And I am the only one who puts these notes together. I am going to be firing myself after this.
It's great, though. It's so funny.
Well, look, it's a Freudian slip. Because I am a human nerd.
We all are.
I will live up to that title, as you'll see during the course of this presentation. I'm curious though, like, where does your story as a writer begin?
Well, I think my story begins with always being a noticer of things. And I first and foremost am a poet. And the book I wrote is prose and it's nonfiction. But I see the world through a poet's eyes and notice details and subtleties. And I have very early memories of noticing things and being intrigued and curious and drawn into them and noticing details that when I would point them out, other people wouldn't have noticed. And so I think that's actually the way that I see the world is probably where the writing begins.
What's an example of kind of maybe an early memory of how you saw the world, maybe just a little bit differently from other people?
Well, I write about this in my book. And I think my story really begins with the animals. And I have a memory, I think at about like 3 or 4 years old, of standing in this hallway and watching these human interaction, adults interacting. And then I had been watching the dogs that were in my life at that time. And being aware that there was this really big difference between the way that the humans were interacting and the way the dogs were interacting. And there was like this, they were like these, it was like a tunnel that I was in. And I remember noticing it and feeling very drawn to the dogs and very repelled by what I saw in the humans. And so I became really fascinated in watching animals and watching people and studying nature and looking for patterns and parallels and trying to understand the world around me and what it evoked in the world within me.
Yeah. I always think my sister-in-law has in her house. This is my sister-in-law, Karen, who is a dear friend of mine. She's got this plaque in her house that says, or sign. I'm probably overdoing it by calling it a plaque. I mean, it's not in brass, right? I mean, it's just it's like a little saying in her, and it says, "Be the person your dog thinks you are."
Yeah.
And I always thought that, and I agree. I mean, there's so much human behavior out there that is so vile. But dogs just, they just, first of all, they always make me smile whenever I see one. But I look at even the 2 dogs that I have, and I'm like, gosh, their day is not filled with some of the same garbage that we have to worry about, and they're just like pure souls almost, for the most.
Yeah, and I think that as a noticer of things, that the purity of my own soul just felt the joy of that, and it sparked within me an aliveness that felt so good and felt exactly at the core of who I am. And then I observed this adult world around me, the adults around me, and it was like this distorted like describe it as like funhouse mirrors. And 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 I started realizing like the animals are very honest and very present, and they're very alive in every moment. And that very young part of me that just felt so fully awake to what was happening within me and around me identified with that more than I identified with this adult world around me that seemed, inauthentic and confused, and there was a lot of stress and tension. And so that juxtaposition, that I noticed that at a really young age, and I became a student of it. And in some ways, I think that the writing and studying that was a way of escaping. It was my own little world, my own little, laboratory that I controlled. And so it was a safe place to be. And it was a place where my art and my craft of writing was born. And, but it was also a place to hide out. And I've learned to come out of that world and find a way back into the human herd. But I have to say, early on, writing was definitely a way for me to retreat, and not always in a good way.
When did you notice that you had like a knack for writing or a talent for it? Anyone ever pointed out to you, or how did you learn about this, ability within yourself?
I was an early reader. Like I learned how to read at a very young age, and I learned how to write. And so it was always applauded. It was always pointed out to me. So I can't remember a time that people didn't call me a writer,
Yeah.
Which was really interesting, because that noticer of things, I knew that writing was a good skill. I don't think that I realized that this natural gift of just noticing details and being able to articulate them, it was not just a skill, it was an innate capacity within me. So, but very early age. And, I was like the kid whose essay got read out loud as an example of how to write it, and wrote lots of stories, lots of poems. And then I went and got an MFA in creative writing after my undergraduate, which was an incredible 3 years of just immersion into that part of me.
Yeah, that sounds like it sounds like a dream. I would love to go back and do something like that. Time permitting. I have 3 kids in college right now, so I don't see that happening anytime soon for myself. But,
I have to say, I can't believe my parents like co-signed that idea, because it's poets are not the most marketable in the world. And so, I thought about going to law school, and I was a women's studies minor, and I was really into advocacy, and I loved, reading and writing. I thought, well, that would be a really good place to put it to use in the world. And then I pivoted and said, no, I'm going to go get this MFA in poetry. And, it's like, it would be easier to say I was going to go become a famous rock star. Like, it's such a narrow market in the world. No one reads poetry anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if it's any consolation, I've had many a guest on this show who were former attorneys and sort of walked away from that career to pursue creative writing.
Oh, beautiful.
So there you go. There's hope even for them.
Yeah.
But, what were you studying as an undergraduate in college?
I studied English literature, and I did a lot of creative writing courses. I was really interested in Irish literature and contemporary American literature. And then I had a religious studies minor and a women's studies minor. I had a very rough start to college. I just didn't go, which was, it turns out, is a problem. And I was really busy doing other things and couldn't be bothered. And I was just a very lost time of my life. And about 1.5 years into kind of avoiding college, but, not just trying to be in college, but not really there. I woke up and realized, and it was in a poetry class where I was like, okay, if I can make college be what I need it to be, and I'm studying the things that I love, it'll support me having to study the things that the university wants me to study to get the degree. Yeah. But I had always been a student, but I went through a really rough patch emotionally where it was hard to really focus that part of myself. So, but English literature, or, is a literature degree.
Yeah. Yeah. And then where is the being a psychotherapist come into play?
So I taught writing at a university level, and helped start an MFA program at a university, and ran a literary arts center. And I did that for about 7 years. And that was, so I found a way to be a professional poet, which is in academia, but it's a really hard place to be an artist. And I didn't love the culture, university culture, and at least the one that I was at. But I loved the students, and I loved the intimacy of working on their art with them, and what that did in the relationships. And so I found my office hours were starting to feel like therapy sessions. And so I decided to go take a couple of graduate courses in clinical psychology. And I look back on it now, and I think I was doing a little running from myself, and there's a lot more to that story, but I do think it was a good idea. But I think at the time it was a little escapism, like an escape hatch to get out of the academic situation that I didn't love being in.
Yeah, I was curious, what might you have been running from? Was it just the university politics, or was it from?
Yeah, traditionally poets weren't necessarily housed in universities. That's like a newer phenomenon. And it's a pretty cutthroat world. It's competitive. And I was doing really well in publishing. I published a book as I was on my way out of academia. And I was building, these programs in the center and working really hard at that. But there's, the cultural divide between tenure and not tenure, and where you are in your career and seniority, there's a lot of hierarchy there. And so it's not unusual for people to take ownership of work of younger, faculty members. And so there was a lot of that. It was very competitive environment, and it just did not suit me at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like if you have an artistic soul, that kind of environment is sort of your kryptonite almost.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because most English departments are they're full of people that write about other people's writing. And then there's the few poets and fiction writers who are actually creating new work. And so you've got the critics sitting with the artists trying to actually work together in the same culture. And it's an odd configuration. And I think there's just very different sensibilities and ways of being in the world. And so, I found that I did go on and teach clinical psychology, and I've continued to teach, forever. And that setting and that department, and doing it part-time has been, that's a huge joy. That's always been a joy. So when I got myself as an artist I took the art out of the academia, it really helped. For me, that was a big change.
Yeah, that was my original career path, was clinical psychology. I was going to do a PhD program in clinical. That's what graduate was. I did undergraduate research in child abuse and trauma, as exciting as that sounds. But I decided to take a year off of education, and I got a job in advertising, and I unfortunately never went back for my PhD.
Unfortunately or fortunately?
Unfortunately. Yeah, it was always one of my big regrets, is that was my first love. I mean, I knew from the time I was 18 that that's what I wanted to do.
What did you love about it?
I think it was just trying to understand what makes people tick. Like, first and foremost, just understanding sort of the basis, the mental basis of behavior, the mind-body connection. Yeah. And then there's, part of me that, I consider to be a healer, and wanted to really just help people who were having, some psychological issues. That's what I really wanted to do. And I wound up working in marketing where I was, to be honest, helping people who had some psychological issues.
Right.
Just in a different way.
You can take that part of you anywhere you go, as it turns out. I get to do that too. I mean, I've worked as a therapist for a long time, and now I do I help people with their relationships with themselves and each other, and a lot of it is workplace setting. And so it turns out there's a lot of trauma and healing needed there.
Oh God, some workplaces are just toxic environments.
They are
just toxic.
Yeah.
So tell me about natural leadership. What is this model you pioneered?
So that early memory that I talked about with the dogs, and then, when I was about 5 or 6 years old, I fell in love with horses, and that studying of the discrepancy between other animals and the human animal has been this lifelong adventure, and it's taken me into incredible experiences. And I live on I own a horse ranch here in Northern California, and I have a whole herd of horses, and I've been training border collies with sheep herding for 28 years, and it's been it's been a core part of my life, partnering with animals and learning from them, and all the while studying human psychology and writing about it, and learning about that and trying to help others with relationship. And so the natural leadership model takes these core concepts that I've learned from the animals and puts them into some simple terms and ways of understanding how they apply to human life. And they're very basic, but they're parts of us that we have let go of or have gone dormant because we're so over focused on thought and language. And it's kind of funny as a writer to say that language is the problem. And so I try to to point out that it isn't so much about language that we're wanting to let that go, or that it's actually just making room for this mammal part of us that's still very much alive, and actually helps us feel more alive when we are in touch with it and attending to the signals of that part of us. And the animals taught me to attend to those signals in a much bigger way than any human teacher or healer or classroom. And so what I've done with people, with my horses and dogs and here at my ranch, is we do experiential work with the animals to try to wake that part of the human animal up. And that way we could take care of ourselves much better, take care of our relationships, and learn how to be group members. And the animals have been my teachers. And so the natural leadership model really is theirs.
Yeah. I think about, we were talking about dogs before, right? And what they can teach us. They're pack animals.
Right.
They want to be outside. Like my dogs are just
they
want to be outside, right? Running, playing, kind of doing their thing. I get mad when they go and chase, my dog Murphy likes to chase squirrels, and I get mad at him because, if he runs away and, it creates kind of a hassle, but that's kind of innate. They like to do that stuff. And we, as sort of human animals, we've got our shelter, right? We've got our meals, we've got Uber Eats. There's so much that we've lost along the way of having to really work for our food, having to, we don't have to be with people anymore. Apparently, we can,
right.
We have social media, we have Zoom. Not that I'm complaining about Zoom, because that's how I make a living these days, but there's so much of us that we've lost, that we need to be taught how to regain, I think. And I think I'm hearing a little bit of that and how you're describing natural leadership.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's the good news is we haven't lost it. It's actually right there. And it's just a bit asleep. And so we have to flip some switches on. But we have all of these capacities within us to be able to attend to our own needs as they come. I'll give an example. we often, our body will signal to us that it's thirsty or hungry, or that it needs to go, use the restroom. And most people will admit that they ignore that signal. They ignore those signals on a daily basis. And so if you think about that our body is telling us, and you think about other animals who do not ignore those signals, it's just a radical acceptance of self-care. And you think about that we ignore our basic needs, and that is actually our baseline, is to live every day ignoring basic needs. And whether it's movement or rest or human contact, a drink of water when you need it, breathing, actually good, healthy breathing. We hold our breath. We hold tension in our muscles, even when our muscles are telling us that they don't like it, that they're inflamed and agitated. And what the dogs show us, and I think it's why people love dogs, and it's actually what children will show us, because they're very honest about their needs. They teach us that we never had to give that up, and that is a socialized norm. And we learn to give that up when we take kids and put them at desks and say, here, put your body here and learn in this. Why did we decide to do that? Most kids fall out of the chairs at those desks because their squirming little bodies can't handle it. And so a lot of our cultures are constructed around the ignoring of needs. And what we love with our animals is that they wake that up in us, and we admire it in them. And we actually have a lot to learn if we follow them, and as role models. And so my horse herd has been an incredible faculty of teachers. And they show what that radical self-care looks like, but they also show what empathy looks like, and how to pay attention to the signals of others in order to stay safe and stay together, and to stay in a state of ease. And then they show ongoing, consistent, low drama communication to be able to negotiate needs and adjust to needs. And then they show attention to the environment and being able to adapt and change all day, every day as needs change. And we just don't have great examples of that in our human herd.
Yeah.
And so, the animals are if we can take those lessons and those concepts and elements and practices, they're behavioral, and then we get to layer our incredible intellect and language on top of that, it's a much happier human life.
Yeah. You were saying, you're talking about kids before, and I have 3, we have triplets. They're
my,
they're about to turn 20. But I remember when they were like really, really young, like I'd say before preschool, and even probably a little bit after, they would always want to put on shows with us, right? After dinner, we're going to do a show. They love performing. They love just sitting down and drawing, creating, just kind of living in a little bit of a, for lack of a better term, a little fantasy land. But then something happens where like the after dinner shows just stop. They get a little bit more self-conscious about their own creativity. It's almost like it's no longer watered. There's no more sunshine coming onto it. And I think that is part of the way we socialize, that we're socialized as sort of as our own society here. It's like, you're right. We put them in desks, we make them sit down. We talk to them about, math and history. And I'm not saying those things are bad, but maybe the way we approach it, could be altered somewhat.
Well, we cut ourselves off from the body. And so the way that we're learning isn't experiential anymore. But for, if you look at the rest of the world and you look globally and multiculturally, a lot of learning is done through experience and mentorship. And it's not in, the classroom with a bunch of desks that's only one way that people learn in the world. But what has that done to us, and what does that cut us off from? And it cuts us off from, the body is where we're most awake. And it does, when the body is awake in that way and all those signals are flowing, the mind has access to so much more. It actually enlivens and awakens the mind. And so it's not the other way around. The mind actually does a lot to suppress the body, as it turns out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about the book, The Human Herd, as opposed to The Human Nerd.
Like my favorite thing that's ever happened about my book. I know it's the first time it's happened and I'm very excited about it.
Well, I'm glad to be of service, but when did you start, thinking that, hey, you wanted to take all of this stuff that you've learned and apply it into a book? When did you start thinking about it?
I mean, this is a body of work that I've been putting together for a long time, and I've had incredible teachers, and so a lot of, I believe in multi-generational learning, and so wanting to pass down what I've learned from my mentors and teachers out and putting that out in the world. But I've been teaching cohort groups. I've had students through my business, the Circle Up experience, who I've been taking through my model for a number of years now. And so I wanted to take that model just out of those smaller groups, which are really intimate and, 1 year long programs, and be able to have a wider audience to be able to read about this. The book is kind of a hybrid in that I tell stories. Every chapter has a personal story about the concept, and then it has a section that's describes the concept, and then it has a practice, so something that you could do to try to bring that concept to life in your own world. And so I wanted to be able to share that model in a broader way.
Yeah. And how long were you working on it for, would you say?
I think books are working on us before we're working on them. I don't know. I think, I also think that people talk about writing a book for a year, writing a book for 2 years. And honestly, I think a lot of the book writing process is the like writhing around on the ground, crying, like, this is so hard. I can't do anymore. Like, or sitting down and getting up and sitting down and getting up. Like, how much time is actually spent writing down words versus all of the avoidance and agony getting to the words. And so for me, it's really hard to gauge, like, how long did this actually take? If you were to, look at my computer and it logged when I was actually writing versus all of the drama around the writing.
Right. Well, it's all part of the story though, right?
Yeah.
That's some of that drama and some of the struggle,
Right.
So it's coming out on April 12th.
Yes.
And where will it be available for sale?
It's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. Somebody recently pointed out you can get it at Target online, and it'll be in bookstores. And you can also, pretty much anywhere where you can get books, it will be available. You can find, there's a page for the book called thehumanherdbook.com. And you can also find me through my website, which is thecircleupexperience.com.
All right. I'll put all of that in our show notes so nobody has to remember that.
Thank you.
But I do have a few questions for you that I try and ask everybody. I try to find some patterns and responses. Some of these questions will be trickier than others. It's always interesting to see which ones, trip people up.
Okay.
And I always get surprised. But first up is, what were some of your favorite TV shows when you were a kid?
Magnum PI was my favorite.
Now we're talking the OG Magnum PI, right? Tom Selleck.
Yeah.
Right? Because the new one isn't bad, but
there's a new one.
There is a new Magnum PI.
I don't even know what to say about that.
Yeah, I know. And look, I'm a big fan of the old Magnum PI, right? You've got your Higgins, you've got your TC, you've got your, of course, Thomas Magnum. The new show turns it on its head a little bit. Higgins is a woman. And like a former MI6, spy. But she's she's a great counterbalance to the new Thomas Magnum, who is played by Jay Hernandez. I think it's Jay Hernandez. Anyway, the new show is good, but I agree that original Magnum, we're talking
loved Magnum.
Great 80. Who doesn't love the red Ferrari too?
Loved everything about Magnum. I'm from Detroit originally. And he always wore a Tiger's cap. And I don't know if that was that was like the anchor, but yeah, I just absolutely loved Magnum.
So yesterday I was doing one of these and someone said Dallas, and that made.
Oh yeah. I remember Dallas.
Just another great one. Okay. So if we were following you around, back in the time when you were watching Magnum, or maybe a little bit older, you tell me what year you want to pick. What would we find you listening to? I imagine you may have had a Walkman with a cassette player in it. What's some of the music that you were listening to back in those days?
So I was really into the Beatles at a young age. I started seeing live music at a pretty young age. And so I got really into the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, early Genesis. Yeah, I was really into Prince. Just crazy wild about Prince. And I'm from Detroit, so there's a lot of Motown in my life. Yeah, those were probably primary.
A Genesis with Peter Gabriel, or
Yeah, like the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Genesis. Yeah.
I only saw them once. I saw them, and it was much later. It was summer of '92. The Meadowlands in New Jersey. It was the We Can't Dance tour. They were.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would have been like I'd given up on Genesis.
Yeah, they were a little poppy. But they played some of the older songs, and I'll tell you, Phil Collins was one heck of a front man. I mean, he knew how to work the crowd. That was a fun show. No, I like the older stuff too. I have to say the more progressive Genesis, I thought was.
And I did have a Walkman, one of those early the Walkman, but I also listened to a lot of records. So I had a record player, and
yeah, you could really dig into the liner notes if you were
that
kind of stuff with the records. Yeah. Number 3 is, how do you feel when you're staring at a blank piece of paper or a blank computer screen when you're just about to start writing something?
It depends on what it is I'm writing. And so if I am compelled to write a poem, and sometimes that comes from like an image or something I've noticed I want to start describing, or it's almost like a craving that starts to emerge. And that's a really exciting moment, the blank page. It's like entering like a beautiful landscape. But if it's something where, if somebody's asking me for a work proposal, or, it's kind of a format that somebody else has asked for, then it's not, and it has less freedom, then I'll sometimes have some angst, and I'll notice I'm holding a lot of pressure in my body because I'm like, oh, I have to do this thing, and it doesn't have the freedom that a blank page for poetry does.
Sure.
Yeah.
What are some pieces of advice you would offer to an aspiring poet?
Aspiring poet or writer, or both?
Well, it could be both. I'm curious about poet only because I know that's you just certainly identify as one, but you could take it in either direction.
I think really reading a lot of poetry it's always been huge for me. And so, find in seeing what other people do with that form. And it really broke down so many barriers and allowed me to find my own voice. And so sometimes it was imitating voice, or there were lines that would inspire me, like as a launching place. But the more I did that, the more it was like just becoming part of a family of poetry and feeling like it has its own current, like a river. And so it's like becoming part of that is so important, I think, for artists to become part of the world that their art resides in.
Mm-hmm. And if you could travel back in time and, if you could write a letter to your younger self and sort of send that letter to your younger self, what kind of advice would you give, the younger Beth?
Just general advice, or about writing, or any kind of
life advice?
the younger Beth was full of a lot of worry and angst. And some of that was because there were worrisome things going on around me. But also some of it was a lack of faith in my own ability to carve out a life where I could meet my own needs. And I think it would be a letter that with a lot of message of how strong how strong I really am. Cause I think I had a lot of doubt in that when I was younger, and I don't have that at all now. So I grew out of that and built, I did a lot of healing of my own. And so I think the self-doubt, the worrisomeness, it's like, oh yeah, like you've got worrisome things happening around you, and you're not wrong about those. But the thing you are wrong about is that you can absolutely handle it, and you can carve out a life where you don't have to have those stresses, in your world.
Yeah. Almost kind of just
Yeah,
reassuring yourself that everything's going to be okay.
exactly. Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
good. Well, your book, The Human Herd, with an H, Awakening Your Natural Leadership, will be available on April 12th. You can buy it wherever books are sold, including Amazon, bookshop.org, and apparently Target. Beth, this was a fun conversation. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.